Hey everyone, let's get started making a development environment with the idea to eventually move to being in production. In order to make a project though, we first need to talk about emulators for a little bit. The emulators are still in beta, so what I'm about to say will change, hopefully. But for right now, they only emulate some of the features of Firebase. So for example, they cover the database, Firestore, and code, cloud functions, but they don't cover authentication yet. For anything that they don't cover, they need to go to the real Firebase, which is what you'll see when you go to your Firebase console. For local development, this is necessary, I would say, because for something like a cloud function, I just tested this. I did 2 trials and I bundled my code. It turned out to be 100 kilobytes and I uploaded that to Google. And what it took was 60 to 90 seconds in the end. This is part of what I keep saying in a lot of these videos that you'll see, which is that Firebase handles so much for you that it might seem like, why does it take that long? But the reason why is that they need to make it available in whatever regions, on however many instances you might need. They need to probably do some validations and checking. So by bypassing all of that and just being able to write code, save, and have it be run, that's what we gain from the emulator. Google also says that they want accuracy over speed or features or security. That is great for local development. I don't mind if something takes me an extra 300 milliseconds, but I would certainly mind if I had to spend a minute every time I want to make a change to a function. Let's talk about projects now. This is what my Firebase console looks like. We can see I've got 5 projects. I've got the add project button. What is a project though? Well, it's just a logical grouping of all the different services that you have and the payments for them. Projects themselves are free. You're paying for the resources in them. So if you just click make new project, it's not going to cost you money, but then it's not also doing anything. They're very easy to set up, and I'll show you that process. They're also isolated in 2 ways. One, in terms of features. Project A and Project B do not have the same database. So it's not like this is Firestore for your account or this is Cloud Functions for your account. It's per project. But also it's payments that are isolated. And that means that each one gets its own free plan. So for example, if you want to do 50,000 writes per day in a Firestore, that's free in their Spark plan. And so each one of your projects gets that 50,000 writes themselves. My biggest question when getting started with Firebase was, well, the emulators are limited. I ran into those limitations myself and projects are free. So how am I supposed to differentiate between development and production? And the advice that I found all over the internet was to just make multiple projects. If you want development and production, then go make 2 separate projects and set them up in general the same way as you would. And then what you can do locally with emulators, do locally. And what you can't, you'll have to go to the real Firebase for that. To demonstrate creating a project, I wanted to start from as blank a slate as I reasonably could. So I made a new Windows VM. And the only thing I installed on this was Node. I don't have the Firebase tools. And actually, I also installed Visual Studio Code for showing you code. But other than that, this is just starting out. And we're going to make a project. This process has, for some reason, been failing. I don't know why. So let's hope that it works this time around. We're not going to enable Google Analytics. And I'll click Create Project. And then this step takes a decent amount of time. Okay, so now we have a new project. And if we go look at this, it'll take us right to that project's dashboard. We can see that all the main features of Firebase are over here on the left. Now, one thing I highly suggest doing is bookmarking this page, as you will find yourself going back to this quite a lot. On my own computer, so now outside of the VM, I have a home page. It's got my default, just a generic Firebase console, and then my dev and prod versions of my site. So going back to the VM, let's look at database, for example. None of these features are set up by default, so you actually have to create the database and you get some options with that. Let's look at what they are. The first one is, do you want to be in production or test mode? The only thing this is going to change is your default security rule. In production, it's saying don't allow anybody any access. And in test mode, it's going to say allow everybody all access as long as you request it within the next 30 days. So let's start in production mode and click next. It'll ask us for our location. And I'm going to choose US Central. This is just the default that it chose for me. This is a multi-region location as opposed to something like US West 2, which is presumably hosted in California. So let's click done over here. All right, it's done. It brought me to this page, which is my database. I could start a collection. I could make something like users here, and I could give it a document already, and we could just say something like name equals Adam and hit save. and it will make our users collection. And because there's a document in here, we should see Adam. Yep, there it is. And we have a randomly generated ID, but there's our user. So we can manage a database through this. We could search it if we want to. There's a filter here, so we could type something like name equals Adam through this and find this user. Let's get to some code around this. We'll start by installing the command line interface. So I'm going to choose Windows here, but then we're actually going to install this through NPM. So you don't need to know this page or anything. This is the only command that we need. And I'll copy this just directly into our command prompt, and it will install this package globally, and then we'll have access to the Firebase tools. The installation completed. You can verify that by just typing Firebase, and if it works, then you'll get some output here. And the very first thing you have to do is Firebase login. I won't show this on video. This is pretty straightforward. It's going to pop up a web page and you'll log in. We'll come back in just a sec. Now that we've logged in, we can verify that with Firebase projects list. It should list out our project, which I believe we called Firebase test. Yep, there it is. So now I'm going to make a new folder. I'll just call this the same name as the project, and we'll cd into that folder. And I'll do Firebase init here. This is a guided installation process. So we'll say we want to begin. What features do you want to use in this folder? Let's say Firestore and functions and emulators. Okay, good. We're going to use an existing project. It's the one we just made, Firebase test. And then it'll ask us for some paths for files that it creates. We're going to use the defaults, use JavaScript, ESLint. Do we want to install the dependencies? This is for the functions that we can make, and it'll set up a template for us. Finally, it asks, where do you want to use the emulators? We can choose functions in Firestore. And then ports, we can use the defaults and download them, and we're all set. So if we look in the resulting directory, we now have a functions folder, and we have some of the files that it's outputted for us. And in that functions folder, by the way, this has a package.json and installed a bunch of node modules for us to be able to use that. We could take a look at this package.json file here, and we see it's got Firebase admin and Firebase functions. Let's get to the point where we can dump that users table that we made over here in the database. So we're going to make a new file here. We'll just call this test admin. This, I'm going to paste in some code. This requires the Firebase admin node module. And what it's going to do is it's going to get everything in the users collection, iterate over it, and just dump all of the data from there. So we're going to save this and then try to run it. And something's going to go wrong here. And I'll tell you guys the problem because this will take a second. It won't be able to find our project that we have. And part of the reason why is this. We are saying we want to use the application default credential, but it doesn't know what that is. And this is so that not just anybody could do these same steps and connect to my database. So we need to give it the credentials. Okay, so to get the credentials, we're going to go to this little gear right next to project overview, click that, and then go to project settings. And this is going to take a second apparently. And then we'll go to service accounts. And typically what you're about to see here would be very private. In fact, the button says private key right on it. But I'm going to delete this project by the time this video is even online. So I will show you guys what this contains. We are downloading a JSON key, and I'll open this up in Visual Studio Code so that you can see what it contains. The very first thing is project ID. And that is what's identifying our project. The error, I don't think I actually showed this in the last video. The error earlier was unable to detect a project ID in the current environment. So the way that we fix that is by specifying our credentials. We have a lot of other private information here, but now that we have this file, we can use it. The way that you can use these credentials can either be by specifying them through here. Instead of application default, you could specify a path, but I actually prefer to do it this way. That way this code is not modified for everybody with a specific path. So instead what I do is I set an environment variable. So we have Google application credentials, and then you'll want to type the path to that download that we have, which is here. In fact, it's actually the only thing in my downloads folder. I don't know why I'm trying to find the path to it. So there it is. So I set the credentials there, and then let's try running our code again this time, now that we have the credentials set. And it says dumping users collection and gave us our data. So that's the most basic thing we can do with the admin SDK. What we did was we just dumped the collection. Now let's try writing some client-side code. In order to write any client-side code, we first need an app. So we'll go to our settings, and it says there are no apps in our project. We'll click the web button here, and we'll make an app. I'm sure we'll call this my web app. I'm not going to set up hosting. This is relatively straightforward for a feature, and their documentation is great for that. We're just going to cover some basics here. And now it gives you instructions on how to use this output. So we'll copy this into our project. Okay, I said we'd paste this into our project, but we don't actually have a project. So let's go save an index.html and just type out HTML and body and paste that in. And it's got this to-do item here that says add SDKs for Firebase products that you want to use. So let's go get from the get started with Firestore, we'll get that script tag and we put this in over here. And then they also have some code for how to connect to the database. So we'll go plop this in here. And one last thing, we will connect this. Now this code won't work, and you might be able to tell why. But after this, I started up an HTTP server, so I did install this through NPM. If you don't have an HTTP server, you can install one very quickly. And then we can just go over to here, and I'm going to refresh the page, and it says this: error adding document, Firebase error, permission denied. The permission denied error is because when we set up our database, we set it up in production mode, which gave us this security rule. This says allow read and write if false. So nobody other than the admin SDK gets access to it. That's how we were able to list it when we use Node.js, but in the browser, nobody has access. So for now, just to show that this works, we're going to set this to true, and this is a little bit laggy. So we're going to hit publish, and there we go. And now we're going to refresh our page over here. And we can see it says document written with ID, JQUH. And now let's go into our database and see, there it is, JQUH. And this should say Ada Lovelace. There we go. Sorry if that seemed disjointed. I hope it still came through how easy it was to get everything set up. But I wanted to do it from a brand new VM so that it'd be closer to what you'll be doing in your own environment. There's one more thing I wanted to show here, and that was this Firebase use command. These are aliases. So like I said, you should set up a dev project and a prod project and whatever else you might want, like staging. And Firebase use is how you'll switch between them. So if I want to switch from here, which I'm on prod, back to dev, I just do Firebase use dev. And in order to add these in the first place, you use Firebase use --add. My conclusion from all this is that it's easy to get started. I didn't show you guys the emulator setup myself, but I did show you the command to run them, and then there's just one line of configuration to use them. What I really like is the Firebase console. Like I said, you should definitely bookmark that because it's a very easy way of seeing all your data laid out. Hope you learned something from this video. Thanks for watching.